So I've been on the audition trail for 8 years now, and after 17 auditions, I've been offered the position of third horn of the Louisville Orchestra, and I want to talk to you about it. Hi everyone, my name is Scott Legier. I am currently a horn player in the New World Symphony, and soon I will be joining the Louisville Orchestra as assistant principal third horn. If you're new to the channel, this is a place where I regularly share performances of myself playing horn etudes, excerpts, and other solo music. I also post teaching videos where I try to show you all of the things that I've learned throughout the years to help my horn playing better, and every once in a while I try to make you laugh too. If you've been around for a while, then this kind of video is probably going to be new to you. I haven't really done a lot of vlog style content yet, but I wanted to share with you today a little bit about the audition process that I just went through to be offered a full-time professional orchestra job. Auditioning is a huge part of the orchestra musician's life. It's something that we all frankly obsess over. A lot of your education is focused on auditioning. Postgraduate programs are based about auditioning, and winning a job is the main goal for a lot of musicians. So personally for me, it feels unbelievably exciting, validating, and fulfilling to have the chance to start my career in Louisville. But I also think that after going through this process and doing this for 8 years now, that I have some things that I want to offer that I learned throughout this journey, and things that I think finally were able to push me past the finish line and help me win the audition and be offered this job. So later in this video, I'm going to do like a real full breakdown of my entire audition journey from audition number 1 all the way to Louisville. And I'm even going to talk about what happened on that day at the Louisville Orchestra audition, and how I felt and what I was thinking while the audition was going on. But before I do that, because that is going to take a little bit of time to get all the way through that, I want to just kind of offer you the key main takeaways that I've learned through taking auditions. The first major takeaway of auditioning that I got through this process was that auditioning really is in fact a process and not an event. So much focus is done on the one audition day, thinking about how you're going to play the excerpts and perform them technically and get all the, the I's dotted and the T's crossed. But actually, I feel like understanding that the audition journey is going to take for many people dozens, if not even more auditions, and understanding that long process is something to expect and something to plan for changes how you approach each individual day, each individual audition. For example, as I started taking more and more auditions, the importance of any one specific audition didn't feel as impactful or as stressful or as important as taking many auditions and just kind of noticing trends in my playing and thinking about things in a much longer term than worrying about the one specific day. Another way to summarize this is that instead of focusing on the specific day and trying to win one specific audition, you're just preparing and going through the process so that you could win an audition at any time. And as a part of that process, another takeaway I learned is that every single audition you take is preparation for the next audition that you take. Sometimes as I was going through the process, I would get the impression that I had to start over from scratch every single audition. But as the frequency of auditions increased and I was taking more and more closer together, I started to realize that when you're sort of in audition mode and your playing is healthy and it's consistent, and you're just slowly improving and getting consistency in these excerpts over time, you do start to realize that all of the work that you do for an audition, even if that's not the one that you win, does make the next one much easier and makes it much more successful. I think anyone who's taken a lot of auditions can tell you that at times they feel really unpredictable. You can play really great and not advance. You can play what you think is not great at all and still make it through the next round. And what this sort of revealed to me is that instead of focusing on being perfect and having a great audition and nailing absolutely everything on the list, auditions are much more about leaving an impression on the committee and having special moments throughout the list, throughout the audition, that they can remember and latch onto. it's not about so much being the greatest player they've ever heard, but giving them the impression that you're somebody that they want to work with, and you're somebody that they enjoy hearing and enjoy listening to. Because they're not perfect on the committee either. No one's perfect on the committee. And that sort of focus can lead you out of practicing for perfection and out of practicing to make sure everything is right and correct, and that sort of binary thinking, into a much more empowering line of thinking where you're just trying to make the best music that you can. The fourth major takeaway that I've learned from doing these auditions is the idea that knowing yourself and knowing how you like to audition and how you like to prepare is half of the battle of taking these auditions. There is so much audition advice out there that will tell you everything from how many weeks out you should be preparing and how many mocks you should be doing and all of these small details, to even the smallest things like how many cups of coffee you should have in the morning of the audition or what time you should wake up, all sorts of these things. But the truth of all that is that they work for different people in different ways, and everyone can only share what worked for them. So learning about yourself and what works for you and what doesn't work for you is much more important to consider throughout this process than finding one silver bullet solution that you have from a coach or a mentor or somewhere on the internet. And the final main takeaway that I've learned throughout this audition process is that I did not become successful at these auditions until I was enjoying music more than I've ever enjoyed it before. Until I was at a place where I truly loved my playing, I truly loved playing the horn, and I just enjoyed playing in an orchestra so much that it was what I knew I wanted to do for my career. That is when I started seeing much more success in these auditions. And it happened to coincide with a lot of things in my life that I'll talk about later. Joining the New World Symphony, starting this YouTube channel and the Instagram and all of that stuff. All of those things really made me feel like I was the musician that was worthy of winning an audition. And that is really, I think, at the end of the day, what pushed me across the finish line and let me be in a place where I could successfully audition and become the third horn of the Louisville Orchestra. Okay, so that being said, we need to talk about how I got there. So these are all of the audition books that I made to take the 17 professional orchestra auditions that I've done over the past couple of years. And each one of these booklets, is a different experience and a different lesson that I learned in order to get from my very first audition for the Houston Symphony on fourth horn to the last audition that I did end up winning. So the first audition I ever took was the Houston Symphony fourth horn audition that I think was maybe when I was a sophomore or a junior in college at SMU. And when I went to this audition, my only goal was to just not get cut off in the prelim round. You've all heard the stories of the committee just saying thank you after you play 2 notes, and I didn't want that to be me. To that effect, I succeeded. I did not get cut off. I was able to finish the list, and I even got to play a couple of things twice. Again, they wanted me to play things again and change some things, but ultimately I didn't advance at this audition. And while that's kind of disappointing, I think at the end of the day, this really was about me just getting my feet wet and learning how these auditions go. How do they work? What do they feel like? And on that respect, it was a pretty successful audition. Then a year later, more or less, I took another audition for the Houston Symphony for the assistant horn job. And this audition did not go as well. I don't remember it being a particularly great performance. I remember it was my first time trying to take 2 horns. I borrowed a descant horn from somebody and I had a double horn, and it just didn't really work out the way that I wanted to. But I was committed to taking just about any audition that I could drive to at this time. And even though that really ended up being these 2 Houston Symphony auditions, I'm at the very beginning stages, and I'm just trying to learn how these things work and what works for me. Then I graduated from SMU and I took the San Francisco Symphony Utility Horn audition. This one was the first audition that I had to send a tape for. So I had to make a tape to get invited to the audition, and that was successful. I was able to make a tape, and they invited me to a live audition. And so I flew from New Haven at the time all the way to San Francisco as a long plane ride. And I auditioned for the San Francisco Symphony. But this was also my first experience of being cut off at an audition. I played 2 excerpts, and the second one was Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony, and they didn't like it. So I was asked, I was cut off there. It didn't go very well, and then I hung out in San Francisco being a little bit sad about it for a few days, and then I went back to Yale. And a little bit later in that same year, I took the first audition where I felt like I was committing to the idea of winning a job. And that was the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra Principal Horn audition. And I worked, I think, harder, honestly, for that audition than maybe any other audition I've taken. Almost every single excerpt was new to me. I had so much to learn, and I just thought this was going to be a really cool gig. And I wanted to, I'd taken a couple, and I wanted to really do well. But unfortunately, I got cut off again at this audition, and I did not advance. And I remember feeling really disappointed after this audition. The kind of disappointment that's like, something is wrong. I'm not doing something right. And I need to figure that out because it's frustrating at that point. And so I went to my teacher, Bill Purvis at the time, and we talked about it. And I said, I've taken a couple of these auditions now. They feel, I don't really know what's going on. Nothing feels great. And he gave me the advice to say that you have to imagine the person you're going to be in 5 years and the player you're going to be in 5 years. And you need to start doing what that guy is doing now. And it was the first time that I really did think, like, well, in the long term, what kind of horn player am I going to be? What are my strengths going to be in 5 years? What kind of job do I want in 5 years? And how am I going to get there in 5 years? Instead of approaching every single audition as, how do I win this job? It was now, who's the person, who's the musician I'm going to be at the end of the road? And what is that guy going to do at this audition? The other kind of scary thing about that conversation is that he was almost correct to the date that 5 years later I would win my first big orchestra job in the Louisville Orchestra. So I don't know how he did that. I don't know how he predicted that. But Bill Purvis is a wizard. After I took the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra audition, I took the first Utah Symphony Orchestra Principal Horn audition. And again, this was another one where I didn't advance. They ended up not even hiring at the audition. But I felt a little bit better, and I was kind of back on track. Then, after that one was the first audition that I won, which was the Cayuga Chamber Orchestra Principal Horn audition. This is a small, what's called a Ropa orchestra in Ithaca, New York, that played like chamber orchestra music, so like Beethoven, Haydn, things like that. And I went and I auditioned for this group. I played 2 rounds in the audition, and then they called me on the car ride home to let me know that I was offered the job. And I played with that orchestra for 2 or 3 years, and even got to solo with them on the first Strauss concerto. So this audition was, one of those first signposts of like validation, where it said, you can do this, you can do well at an audition, you can play these excerpts, and there are people out there that like your playing, which is always a great thing to feel. I took the U.S. Marine Band audition in December 2017, unfortunately did not advance there. And then after that audition, the next audition I took was for the Chicago Symphony, which is for their principal horn audition, which Dave Cooper, of course, won. And I think I have that book here. This is the audition book that the Chicago Symphony had us learn for this audition, which is basically just know everything. Just know everything. Know every single piece of music ever written that includes any exposed horn part. And obviously this was an incredibly difficult audition to prepare for, and not one that I was likely going to win. But the plane tickets were $60. and I was free that day, so I showed up and gave it a go. After I took that audition, I decided to leave the doctorate program that I was in at the Yale School of Music to join the New World Symphony. And this moment was really a big commitment to the idea that I'm going to be an orchestral musician and that this is what I want to do, knowing how difficult it is to sort of go through this audition process. But I was committed to this. And the idea of leaving the DMA is really a scary prospect too, because that was an incredibly well-respected program that just would have pushed me in a different career direction. And again, back to the idea that where am I going to be in 5 years and what is that person in 5 years doing? I'm not sure that guy had a DMA. I think that guy was doing everything he could to win and to enjoy performing orchestra music. And so I did decide to leave the doctorate program, leave the DMA, and join the New World Symphony. So after that, I took an audition for the Indianapolis Symphony on third horn. And while ultimately I think I really should have done well at this audition, I didn't advance. And I even remember thinking I played pretty well in the first round. And I was almost pretty confident this was going to be the first one that I advanced at. And it didn't happen. But I thought my playing was good, and I believed in it. And I was figuring things out. This was the first audition I took on the triple horn. I was still figuring things out with this instrument, but that audition, I just remember thinking, like, I'm disappointed I didn't advance. I really thought that my performance on the day was great, but we're going in the right direction. And I was correct, because the next audition I took was the New York City Ballet Principal Horn audition, and I made finals for the first time in a full-time professional orchestra audition. And that was just a really great experience all around. I can't even hide the fact that it just felt great to make it to the end, to advance, to make it to the end of an audition, to have a new instrument and feel like it was working for you, and also to have been in the New World Symphony for 4 months at this point and know that the benefits that that place was offering me were working and that they were pushing me in the right direction. So I also learned at this audition that getting to the finals has unique challenges from the preliminary round, because when you get to the end of an audition, I cannot understate how exhausting it is to do multiple rounds of auditioning in a day, especially when they're asking you to play things multiple times, and especially when those finals rounds can be 10 or 11 excerpts long, including sometimes an entire movement of a solo concerto. It's just physically and mentally taxing to get to the end of the audition. And frankly, I think because this was my first one, that having that experience be new to me might have been what hindered my ability to really succeed at that audition and win. But lessons learned, and we move on to the next one. After that, I took the Philadelphia Orchestra second horn audition, and I advanced to the semifinal round. So now I've consistently advanced at 2 auditions in a row, 1 high horn audition and 1 low horn audition. And again, I never really thought of myself as a low horn player. I took this audition because it was close by, it was easy to get to, but I advanced. And this put a couple of things in perspective, which was, one, I don't need to be limiting myself in the kinds of auditions I'm taking, that I sort of have what I need to play the horn and to play the horn well. And that also kind of triggered my brain into thinking that maybe the issue is not the playing at all, and that maybe there's something else there, but I hadn't quite figured out what that was. And then I took the St. Louis Symphony Assistant Utility Horn, same thing as Philadelphia. High stuff, low stuff on this audition, and I advanced to the semifinal round and didn't make it past that. But I think I played great in both rounds, and at this point I started to really figure out what taking an audition looked like for me, because I'm 12 auditions in at this point. I know what my warm-up routine looks like. I know how I like to sort of present myself and act in the room. And I've also learned a lot of things about my sort of like preparation that I need to get settled. For example, when I'm at the audition, my warm-up routine for any round is to do a 15-minute warm-up of just random exercises that I think help me sound my best, and then I play the first and last measure of each excerpt, and then I put my horn away, and I don't touch it again until it's time to play. Because I had noticed that in my last couple auditions, I was feeling really physically exhausted at the end of the audition, and I was overplaying. If I had the horn near me, I was going to pick it up and play it, and I needed to stop doing that. So I made a rule for myself that I would do this 20 or 30 minute routine that I sort of had crafted in the warm-up room, and that was it. That was the only playing I was allowed to do, and it started working. After the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra audition, I took, again, the Utah Symphony Principal horn, which was the same position I had auditioned for, I don't know how many, 6 or 7 auditions earlier. And this time, instead of not advancing at all, I made it to finals. But I had to play 3 rounds on that day. I had to do the prelims, the semis, and the final round, all in a row. And that was pretty difficult. It was the same problems I had been having earlier with endurance and like mental and physical fatigue. And even though I kind of had my system for kind of controlling myself to keep myself as fresh as possible, I still wasn't quite able to make it all the way through the audition and really feel like I could be my best player from beginning to end. So I was admittedly a bit disappointed after this audition, especially having come so close the second time and having been on a streak of 4 auditions in a row where I had advanced and I had been doing well. But I also knew that things were going well. And this sort of idea, thinking about it's only a matter of time, but not in a sense that like I'm guaranteed one or that I deserve one, but rather that I'm doing the things in my preparation and in my playing that as long as I commit to taking auditions and as long as I continue to have the resources to take auditions, I should be able to find success, and I believe I'll find success. And I think after the Utah Symphony, even though I was disappointed I didn't win, I was able to sort of tell that to myself. But that audition was in 2020, February 2020. So right after it, that's when the whole thing happened, where we stopped playing music for a couple years, and there were basically no auditions from February 2020 after that to really October 2021 was the next time that I took an audition. In those years of COVID, I started to do things a little bit differently because I realized that while I had been having success at auditions, I was also exhausted from taking them. I was kind of exhausted with excerpts. I was tired of playing the same music over and over again. And I don't know if people really remember early pandemic, but there was sort of a vibe at the time that if you weren't practicing for auditions over the pandemic and you weren't preparing for when auditions eventually did come back, then you were wasting your time and letting somebody else who was doing that take those jobs from you. And that, frankly, was the worst advice I'd ever heard in my life. And I actively decided to go against that grain completely. And part of that fed into my YouTube channel and my Instagram page, and eventually my TikTok and all those places too. It fed into my projects at the New World Symphony, where instead of focusing so much on auditions, I was exploring new music, etudes, solo works, and all sorts of things that were fulfilling to me artistically and musically and challenged me as a horn player. That, I think, in a sense, saved me. In a sense, was what kept me excited about music. It kept me playing, it kept me engaged with music, and it made me think of my career as more than just winning the auditions, and that winning the audition and getting a job would just be one step and one part of my musical experience. So just to summarize real quickly, I started recording etudes nearly every week at the early parts of this channel, and now I sort of, make these etudes and these performances as I can fit them in with my New World schedule. I started a concert series at the New World Symphony called Live from Our Living Room, where I was performing solo and chamber works at least once a month, if not even more. I did this huge project called Spectral Sounds, where I recorded this rare work by Tristan Marai called Memoir Erosion. And all of these things, just to really emphasize the point, they made me enjoy playing the French horn, and they made me enjoy making music, and they made me sort of, again, just just become grounded in the belief that music was what I wanted to do for my career, and that I just needed to enjoy making music. In retrospect, that also made me realize another thing that was not going well in these auditions that I needed to work on, which was that I didn't enjoy the music that I was performing. I was performing these excerpts, ironically, like etudes. I was performing them as exercises and challenges that I just needed to overcome to move on to the next round. But I wasn't trying to make music. And so that became my focus from then on, was that no matter what happens, I just need to make music. My practice sort of scheme started changing. You can scroll through my Instagram and sort of see how I started thinking about these things, and changing the way that I thought about my practice and how I thought about breaking things down and really taking it slow and finding the bits of these excerpts that I really did enjoy and I really wanted to be special. Not necessarily that I wanted to play the excerpts right or perfect, but that I wanted to play them in a way that was special to me and special to the committee. And so when auditions eventually started back up, I took the Fort Worth Symphony audition for principal horn and advanced to the semifinals. I didn't get further than that, but after 2 years off, I was still in the game. And then I took 2 auditions back-to-back, Alabama Symphony and Dallas Symphony, both for principal horn, and did not advance in either of them. And again, this was another lesson learned where I had tried to take Fort Worth, Alabama, and Dallas Symphony were all within 5 weeks of each other. And even though these auditions had similar lists and they were all for principal horn, that was too much. That was just too much. And that lesson carried over into the final audition that I just took, which was the Louisville Orchestra audition for assistant principal and third horn, because this audition was happening and there were 2 auditions to prepare for. Louisville Orchestra and the Baltimore Symphony principal horn audition. Really, I knew I couldn't take both auditions. I knew I couldn't take both Louisville and Baltimore Symphony, and frankly, the reason that motivated me to take Louisville over Baltimore is because the audition rep list and the audition invite to the Baltimore Symphony ended up in my spam folder, and I didn't discover that had gone to the wrong place until I felt it was too late for me to prepare accurately. And so I kind of, at that point, just said, you know what? I just can't take it, and I have to do Louisville instead. And so at that point, I committed to the Louisville Orchestra audition, and I'm glad I did. So that was a long summary of my audition experience. 17 auditions for almost every single position in the orchestra, from principal to fourth horn. But I want to talk now about what happened on the day of the audition specifically. So the first thing that I guess I should mention is the preparation leading up to the audition just a little bit, which is that, frankly, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this audition. This was happening during the busiest period of the New World Symphony schedule. Our February was rough. We had concerts every single week, most of them special projects, some of them even multiple programs at the same time. So the only time I had to practice was, 8:30, 9 o'clock p.m. After double rehearsals, getting out of my apartment and going back to the hall for even just an hour if I could manage it. But I did, as I referenced a little bit earlier, I made a lot of content about the audition, and I showed different parts of my practice and my process and sort of merged the idea of my Instagram and my social media presence as an educational platform with my goals as practicing for auditions, and tried to combine those two things and make sure they were serving the same goal at the same time. I did not have time to do a single mock audition, though, for Louisville. That's one thing that people will say you have to do. You have to do 4 or 5 mocks. You have to get opinions from everybody, and you have to try every single. I just didn't have time. It just didn't happen this time. I've done many mocks in the past, and I've obviously done 16 other auditions before this one. But in terms of this audition specifically, I just didn't have time. And the last thing I did in my preparation that I really focused on was knowing that I didn't have a lot of time to put this together, and that I my practice time was going to be limited, especially the week before the audition, I mainly focused on getting the stuff that wasn't great, like Shostakovich Fifth, for example, just good enough. But then I took the excerpts that I was really good at. The John Adams excerpts that were on the audition, the Saint-Saëns organ symphony, pieces like those. And I made sure that those were as good as they've ever been. Because, again, I wanted to have a special moment in the audition, more than I wanted to play everything perfectly. All the preparation's done, and I get to Louisville, and I show up at the day of. So I do my warm-up and my routine in the preliminary audition. I'm first to go at 9 a.m. And then after the round, I play my round. It goes well. It's not perfect. It's not perfect by any means. I think I missed the high B flat in Ein Heldenleben, but it was good. And it represented my playing well, and there were a lot of things, little things in there that I really liked about my playing. In fact, I can even go through my texts with my fiance, and I can read you exactly how I thought about my audition. Or I'm just gonna scroll up. So my summary of this audition was, I said, I just finished playing. I should find out soon. I think it's possible to advance, but I also know what I did wrong, and it was super cold in the space, so my intonation was definitely a bit off. And then I texted, I advanced with a happy face. But that key point in there is I knew what I did wrong. This was part of my process that I started to really add into and focus on, which was that I started to really think about, if I get another shot, if I get another round, what do I need to do better? I thought of what I did wrong. So like, I think in my preliminary round, it could have been something like, well, I was really struggling with accuracy on high notes, coming in on high notes like Heldenleben, for example. And so, okay, if I do this again, that needs to get fixed. And so then when I went back to my hotel room and I was practicing with my practice mute in, I just touched on those things a little bit, and I practiced those excerpts that covered those challenges just a little bit. And then I did the semifinal round the next day. I actually got pretty lucky that my audition for semifinals happened to be around the same time that my prelim audition was the day before. So even though I don't try to put too much stock into making sure that everything is exactly perfect and exactly the same, it is nice that it happened. And again, I did the same thing. I did the exact same warm-up, the same routine of playing only the first and last measures or phrases of different excerpts. But this time, while I was warming up, I was sitting there thinking about my playing, and I thought to myself, I can play really soft today. I don't know why, but today I can play really soft. And also, my articulation doesn't feel great today. And I think it was a really important moment of growth for me, actually, to be able to, instead of responding to that information with panic, but to instead respond to that with a plan, and to say, okay, the soft things today are going to be absolutely soft. We are going to play the quietest pianos we can, because that's going to create a special moment. And today, I think I can take that risk. And some of the more articulated stuff, like Mendelssohn 3, I might need to play a little bit more legato, or even a little bit slower than I normally do, because it's just not working today. And I have to hide that, or I have to sort of mask that so that I can put the focus in my audition on the things that are going really well. That plan worked because I got to play, in the round, I had to play the opening of Schubert 9. And that is an incredibly soft excerpt. And it was the softest I've ever played it. And I also think it was the best I've ever played it, and the closest to performing it in an orchestra that I think I've done for almost any excerpt. That sort of idea of knowing what my strengths were that day and taking the risks related to those strengths, I think is what made me advance from the semifinal to the final audition. I can even pull up again my texts and see what I thought about this audition. I said, I was the first to go in semifinals. There were some really special moments in that audition, especially in the soft excerpts. They let me play some things again, but I did miss more notes than I wanted to. Nothing major, and it didn't seem to affect the music around it. But the really hard stuff on the audition felt great. So I can see them saying, he sounded good, but we're worried about accuracy, or I can see them saying, I'm surprised he missed so many notes, he sounds great. So that's what I thought immediately after the audition. And I did get to advance, of course, to the final round, where we sort of did the same thing again. Once we had the list for the finals, actually, I went out and got lunch, and then I came back, and once we had the list for finals, same thing. Went into the room, played the exact same warm-up, played the first and last phrase of each excerpt in order, and then put my horn down. Because I knew I would overplay, and I had learned from Utah, and I had learned from New York City Ballet that I'm going to feel tired at the end of all this. And so I kept myself from overplaying by committing to this warm-up. And the list was long. It must have been 13 excerpts. It was nearly everything on the audition and the complete first movement of Mozart too. So it was a lot of playing to get through. A lot of high playing, a lot of loud playing, just a lot of stuff. But my process worked, and at the end of the final round, they asked me to play one more round, this time without the screen. I had anticipated that there might be a super final round or some other round, so periodically while we were waiting for results from finals, which took about 2 hours, I would spend like 5 minutes just playing the horn just to kind of keep the blood moving and keep everything warmed up. But really, again, focusing not on overplaying, just making sure that I'm not going to have to play cold if they do ask me to play something again. And then in the super final round, it was just me. They took the screen down. I introduced myself. We chatted with the committee a little bit. I played the first movement of the Strauss Concerto, and then I played 2 duet excerpts, the opening of Beethoven Piano Concerto 5, and the sort of hunting horn call thing from Mahler 1. Played that with the section, and then they offered me the job. In summary, though, it wasn't a perfect audition, and I can't stress that. In fact, I don't even think it was, in some ways, the best playing I've ever done in an audition all the way through. Some of the moments in that audition were some of the best playing I've done at one of these, but overall, I think there have been better rounds I've played. But I felt comfortable mentally and physically the entire time. I didn't really feel too nervous. I felt in control. I felt like I was in a good place, and I felt like I was making great music, or at least that I felt like my focus was on making great music and making special moments. And I think in the end, that's really what did it. That's what made this one different than Utah, than New York City Ballet, than Fort Worth. So what's next? I guess in the short term, the first thing that I have to do is, of course, leave the New World Symphony, my friends and my colleagues there, and move to Louisville, Kentucky this summer to start performing there as early as June. Of course, I'm going to miss my time here at New World immensely. It has been completely career and life-changing for me, and it's really focused me onto this path and given me the opportunity to do that. But the other part of this is that now in the Louisville Orchestra, I start the tenure process. So if you're unaware of what the tenure process looks like, is that basically over the next 2 years, my performance and my sort of position in the orchestra will be evaluated to decide whether or not I'm granted tenure, which effectively means that I will have a protected job in the orchestra with the union, and that artistically I will kind of be fully integrated into the orchestra at the end of that process. In terms of YouTube and creating content, I'm actually going to have a lot of creative freedom and a lot of new time and new energy to invest in both my YouTube and my Instagram and all of my other social media endeavors. You can expect more videos like this one where I'm vlogging and talking about performing, talking about excerpts and etudes. You can expect more teaching from me, more educational videos. And as I start to figure out my performance venues and options to record either in a home studio or somewhere else in Louisville, those performances will of course still continue as well. At the end of the day, as I transition into the Louisville Orchestra and start working there, I'm still going to be trying to bring you guys all the best French horn related content and videos that I can. So as I talked about at the beginning of this video, this audition process really gave me a lot of lessons and takeaways about my own preparation for auditioning. understanding that it's a process, understanding that the key to my own success is creating a space, a routine that's comfortable for me, that makes me feel empowered, and that makes me feel musically satisfied with these excerpts and this music that we have to play to win these jobs. But I really think it's important for me to mention that there's a world out there, there's a universe out there where I didn't win. I didn't win Louisville. And I'm not a better musician or even a different musician today because I did or didn't win that audition. There's a part of this auditioning experience that does come down to luck. And it comes down to being at the right place in the right time with the right face, right setup, right everything about your music that just happens to make the impression on the committee that lands you the job and that makes them want to hire you. So that's why it's all the more important to know that it's a long journey, and it can be a long journey. Some people's journeys are shorter and some people's are much longer. But I think the space that allowed me to be successful at this audition was one where I finally believed that I had the skill, I had the ability, I had the resources, and I had the commitment to stick with it as long as it would take me. And February 22nd happened to be my day. And now I get to be incredibly excited to join the Louisville Orchestra this summer as their assistant principal and third horn. I know that this has been an exceptionally long video, and now I need to do the YouTube thing where I ask you to like, ask you to comment, and ask you to subscribe. If you want to see more vlogs like this, more me talking to the camera about my experiences, let me know in the comments below. If you have any other questions about the auditioning process, let me know. I'm happy to answer any of the questions that you have, and I look forward to bringing you more videos like this, as well as more etudes, more performances, and really more content that you can enjoy. So, have a great rest of your day, or whatever you're up to, and I'll see you in the next video.
Thanks to my fiance for giving me the space.
My fiance, who's behind the camera, would like me to remind you that she gave me the space to do that, and that it was her by her grace that I was allowed to leave at night and go work. Her support. I'm sorry, Lauren.